Hey, hello everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. We are so excited for our next installment of our Miami Studies Coffee and Conversations panel with the Miami Book Fair. So to start us off, I'm going to start off with some introductions. My name is Enrique Rosell, and I'm the program manager here at the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University. And I'm so proud to welcome you to season 5 of our Coffee and Conversations Miami Book Fair discussions. Today is actually episode 5, and we have such an impactful conversation waiting for us. We will learn about our author, Thad Ziolkowski. He's the author of the book, The Drop, How the Most Addictive Sports Can Help Us Understand Addiction and Recovery. This series is a special series. It began at this point about a year and a half ago in the middle of the pandemic, when everyone was looking to pivot in different ways and move forward. We started Coffee and Conversations as a way of strengthening community ties and supporting the great work being done at our many community partners. We've explored many different topics, from how the pandemic has affected museums and cultural institutions, the histories of anti-Blackness in museum spaces, and beyond that. We've chatted with community partners and many of our friends around the Miami area and beyond. Thad is actually joining us from Montclair, New Jersey today. A quick reminder also before we jump in that all of our previous sessions are going to be available on our YouTube channel. So you can watch any of these previous discussions there as well. They will be added as we go along. Now, with this season, we are working again with the Miami Book Fair, okay, which we're so excited about. And we're working on highlighting a number of their book fair authors to provide a kind of teaser for the fair itself that is happening. So today we're talking, like I mentioned, with Thad Ziolkowski, the author of The Drop, How the Most Addictive Sport Can Help Us Understand Addiction and Recovery. And this talk will be moderated by David Drucker, the one and only. Okay, so very briefly, this format is going to simply last about 30 minutes, and at the very end, we'll take some questions from the audience. You can put all of your questions in the Q&A box that you see down in the little bar, the little Zoom bar. Okay, so if you have any questions, make sure you put them in there or in the chat. So without wasting any more of your precious time, let me introduce two of our guests today and our moderator. I'm so excited. So starting off with the one and only David Drucker. So a little bit about David. David is an FIU alum and a staff writer and podcaster for FIU News. He studied broadcast journalism at the university and doesn't hide his Panther pride at all. In 2021, he led the launch of Panther Personalities, a podcast that featured interesting stories from around FIU. He loves Miami, its people, and its great fishing and golfing. He doesn't understand why anyone would ever want to leave Miami, which I love and also agree with. David is known as the FIU sports guy, okay, and has some of the best FIU culture and athletics commentary I've ever seen on his Instagram and Twitter. Follow him at FIU Sports Guy. So make sure you follow him to stay up to date with all of the FIU athletics, to polish your FIU school spirit and have a good laugh, okay? And then also we have our author, Thad Ziolkowski. Thad Ziolkowski is the author of Our Son, the Arson, a collection of poems, the memoir On a Wave, which was a finalist on the Penn Martha Albrandt Award in 2003, the novel Wichita, and The Drop, a nonfiction exploration of surfing and addiction. His essay and reviews have appeared in the New York Times, Slate, Book Forum, Art Forum, Travel and Leisure, Interview Magazine, and Index. He is a recipient, among other honors, of a Guggenheim Fellowship. He is the Associate Director of the Leon Levy Center of Biography at the Graduate Center at CUNY. Thad's new book, The Drop, which we'll be talking about today, is a featured book at the Miami Book Fair. So without further ado, welcome to you both. Thank you so much. And you can go ahead and get started with the questions today. I am so excited to hear about everything.
Well, thank you for that super kind introduction, Enrique. Thad, it is a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I enjoyed your book for a number of reasons. I'm a young writer. I really enjoyed how you put things, and I also enjoyed your kind of dive into the comparisons between surfing and addiction, and how both surfers, a lot of them have a tendency towards addiction, but yet also surfing in itself is an addictive sport. So I guess my first question is, when you were writing this book, were you surprised by the nature of how many top level and also just, surfers you spoke with that had struggled with addiction, or had you already known the extent of it going in?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Enrique and David. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's a great question. I actually grew up hearing indirectly about, I would see as a young boy, I started surfing when I was 10 in Melbourne Beach, Florida. And, you know, I was surrounded by drugs and alcohol at that time. It was 1970. So I saw a lot of pot and acid and psychedelics, but I was pretty wary of all that. I had a scary experience when I was 11 smoking pot. But as I got competitive and started to surf in contests, I would hear stories about older surfers who had struggled with alcohol. And the guy who was sponsoring me, actually, who was a legendary surfer, actually from Miami, come to think of it, Dick Tree.
Hmm.
He was the first surfer from the East Coast to surf Waimea Bay and the other big wave spots in Hawaii. He kind of tapped me to be on his surf team when I was about 13. And I started working in his surfboard manufacturing shed kind of factory in West Palm Beach. And 2 weeks after I started, he was busted for selling like 200 pounds of pot to an undercover agent. And he went away to jail. So that was an early sense I had of like drugs as a way to, dealing drugs, but also using drugs. And he was my hero, so that was an early introduction to drugs and surfing.
Hmm. And you take us through the book through kind of like a nuanced kind of different areas where surfing has been popular and practiced. And for example, I thought what was interesting was kind of your observation about indigenous people in Hawaii and how they would just drop everything they were doing to go surfing if the surfing was good. And then you also did some exploration in California about the progression of, like, because when I didn't know much about surfing coming into your book, but the whole Beach Boys thing, like that's the thing, like, that I was familiar with, and how the drugs changed. And so I want to ask you about that, but I guess before that too, when you were surfing yourself, did you kind of notice like the inherent kind of addictive quality of surfing when you were young, or was it something that you understood more later?
I noticed it pretty soon early on because when the waves would get good, I played a lot of different sports. I played football, I played baseball, I played tennis, but when the waves were good, I was out there and I would drop everything else. And and I also knew surfers who were athletic, who were really oppressed by having to go to swim practice or whatever when the waves were good. So surfing always had this dominant, more powerful hold, and all of us just accepted that as self-evident. Just surfing's more intense, it's more powerful. So I noticed it right away. In terms of the relative power it has in different cultures, it's a really interesting point you make about it in ancient Hawaii. In ancient Hawaii, when the waves got good, everyone would throw down their tools and run to the surf, but it was a sanctioned practice in ancient Hawaii. In other words, it was considered a kind of way of honoring the gods and honoring a specific god of surfing, Lono, I believe I'm correct on that. And the priests sanctified it, and they would fly a kite above. So when surfing translated to the mainland and the kind of capitalist culture, it came into conflict with notions of commitment to work. And so you got this notion of a surf bum or a ski bum, people who were addicted to this thing that dominated their life, in which they would sacrifice, you know, social stature for. So I knew a lot of kids who grew up the best surfer at my local beach was the son of a stockbroker. He didn't become a stockbroker. He could have become one, but he kind of forfeited all that in order to be a surfer. And he got jobs in restaurants. He worked whatever, and he doesn't regret it. But it was very much, I was very aware that this thing had the capacity to derail a conventional middle class life that was kind of handed to people. I saw them just give it away.
Hmm. Which is pretty powerful in terms of showing the correlation between addiction and surfing. And this is something that you really dove into from like, the brain, perspective, can you talk a little bit about your research in terms of noticing the similarities of states when you're surfing and when you're doing different drugs?
Yeah, so for me, this book was really, I had a lot to say about my own life as a surfer and as an addict. I got addicted to drugs and alcohol in my mid-20s when I quit surfing and I was focusing on college and I was becoming a poet. Um, and so I had a lot to say about my own life, and I also knew a lot about surf history. But the one strand of this book that was foreign to me and that I would never have explored had my editor not pushed me to was the brain science. And what I came away convinced by were a couple of things in terms of addiction and surfing and the brain, which is that, the brain is this autonomous kind of realm, and it reshapes itself according to what's giving us a very powerful, kind of experience. So like when I was first surfing, and especially as a young person, you're learning, and the brain is orienting you toward pleasurable learning experiences, and dopamine hits and serotonin and adrenaline and all of these powerful things. So the brain itself was making a surfer out of me without my knowing it in a certain sense. So I came to feel like the brain was, I come into doing this book as a humanist, as someone who thought of addiction as fundamentally a spiritual matter, but I came away feeling like there was a lot more involved with the brain. And in terms of addiction, the most dramatic thing that I learned was that the brain can be thought of as a prediction machine. So we're looking at patterns in the world and we're going like, what does it mean when the water swirls in the ocean? Does it mean it's a shark, or does it mean it's just a wave, or is it the wind? And it's in order for us to survive, we had to figure out a lot of very basic things about the world in terms of hunting and gathering. So when we look at the world now, our brains have evolved to be prediction machines, and what we learn to predict around are patterns. So if a pattern is very regular, it's easy to predict. But if it's irregular, it's more difficult to predict, but paradoxically, it's more powerful in terms of its capacity to hold our attention. So with surfing, you get an irregular arrival of waves. That's why the Hawaiians dropped everything when the surf was good. It's because waves aren't good all the time. They're famously fickle, right? But the reason that surfers become so obsessed with surfing is because of the irregularity of the reward of the wave. Just like addicts become more addictive to cocaine and heroin if they're buying it off the street, where the potency is irregular and the very availability of drugs is irregular. Not to say that cocaine and alcohol aren't addictive in their own right, and you can get addicted to alcohol at the local wine shop, but during Prohibition, I think alcohol was more addictive. Why? Because people got more vigilant about, is it going to be at the speakeasy? Did a shipment of rum come in last night? We don't know. So during Prohibition, alcoholism actually increased. There were more people addicted to alcohol than there are, in a kind of legalized context, because of the intensity of the focus the uncertainty would bring to bear upon the reward of alcohol. Same thing with surfing, same thing with all addictions. So anything that's irregularly presented holds the brain's attention. Like you're like, what's going on? When am I going to get it again? And that is why, and that is the basic fundamental insight that gave me a sense that, wow, this brain research stuff is really compelling, and I need to pay more attention to it. And I was able to link it to various aspects of surfing. One, mainly the addictive quality in its own right.
The rarity of it, like in terms of inspiring, even greater craving, is something that I didn't expect. I learned from your book. And you also gave a personal anecdote of when you were, I think, a director. Were you like in the English department at a university?
Right.
And it was like the first day of class, and there was a great swell, right? And so you were like, okay, like, got to go to the swell. But it turns out, I mean, sure enough, wasn't it like 9/11? So you had to go back. I mean, the The interesting thing like about the privacy of like, you know, the surfing and like going out, sneaking out, not knowing like anyone else, like that's something that I recognize as like, wow, like that is truly like a parallel to drug addiction, you know, the hiding it from the world. Can you talk about why why surfing like can take on an addictive quality in that kind of aspect, and why addictions from your research, you know, tend to often take on a private, hide from the world, let no one see me quality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the story you're referring to, everyone remembers 9/11 as this thing that took us all by surprise. Like no one saw it coming. That's the narrative. But surfers in my area of New York and New Jersey were really aware that something was coming the night before 9/11. Of course, we didn't know about 9/11, but we were like, everyone was up at dawn because there was a huge hurricane coming slowly up the coast, producing waves. There was this weather system that made for that amazing weather in 9/11, that the super, super clear skies of that crazy visibility you get in September in this area. So we were all ready to go surfing, and I also had this first day of class, and so I knew, because the surf was so good, that I was absolutely not going to class, right? But I couldn't tell anyone, hey, there's a great swell. In our culture, surfing doesn't have the stature it had in ancient Hawaii. In our culture, we live in a place where if you commit to teach a class, you know, you're going to be there, or you've got to you've got to call in sick. So I called in sick basically, and I was going to leave a note on the door of the classroom. And then 9/11 happened, and I thought, oh, well, now, there's no way I'm going surfing on 9/11. I went the next day, and people are kind of scandalized that I went the next day because of the sort of sacred trauma of 9/11. But surfing for me has always been a bit like church, like I go to get my spiritual bearings when I surf. So that was how I kind of got over, or began to get over, or deal with 9/11, which happened really close to us. I could see it. Anyway, the shame around addiction and the shame and secrecy around surfing or have an interesting parallel. That's what you're noticing, is that there's an analogous kind of thing. The explanation I give for the surfing is that it's about, you know, the incompatibility of surfing with capitalism, basically. It doesn't work. Capitalism as we know it is a kind of grid that it goes over your entire life, and you've got to be at work at 9, and you will end work at 5 or 6 or whatever. Surfing doesn't happen like that, so it's an incompatible thing. So surfers hide their addiction to surfing, in effect, like addicts hide their addiction. With addiction to drugs and alcohol, people hide it out of shame because it looks excessive and immoral and like a flaw of your personality, that you want something that is clearly not doing you any good. Quickly you come into alcohol, and drugs have a very short honeymoon period, right? They start to be destructive. You start to black out. You're unable to get high on the same amount, so people start to OD. There's a very quick turn, decline, diminishing returns with drugs and alcohol. The difference between them is that surfing is a kind of a good addiction. So fundamentally, surfing is something that makes me stay fit. I look forward to it, and it's a healthy thing. It's a healthy addiction. Drugs and alcohol over here is a fundamentally destructive addiction. But I think the reason drugs and alcohol become so difficult to quit is because is connected to the shame. And that's why, to start to see addiction in terms of brain science, and even if addiction ultimately is not really a disease, it's comparable to a disease. It's like a learning disorder. It may be a learning disorder. This is very much involved with the brain. We don't get a choice, and the more drugs and alcohol you do, the brain is shown to disconnect from the executive function that's up here, actually near the eyes, the prefrontal cortex. That's what tells me get up and go to work or plan for tomorrow. And drugs and alcohol actually just kind of disconnect that to my limbic area, which is the more impulsive and motivational side. The limbic area is the side that says, give it to me, or get away from me. So, like fight or flight. Drugs and alcohol engage the limbic, but if you do enough of it, it starts to disconnect from the adult in the brain, right? And that disconnection is physiological. It's synaptic. It's not ethical. It's not moral. I'm not choosing it. And this is what you were getting at with surfing in terms of brain states that are, so like a flow state in golf or tennis, or anyone who plays sports knows about a flow state where you can kind of do no wrong. And your brain is not thinking, you're moving instinctively, right? That's good. Addiction has a bad flow state where there's a disconnect between the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the brain. And the addict becomes kind of like a robot, and he is just shuffling in these circles with no sense of volition, right? Whereas the flow state of surfing is like a magic carpet kind of feeling, and yet the brain has been the kind of executive function is quiet there too. So there's a mysterious and interesting overlap in that respect also between flow states and severe, active addiction.
Mm-hmm. And I think you were pretty clear in your book to point out that these connections are pretty nuanced. Like it's not as simple as, riding a surfboard equals taking, whatever crack cocaine. You were like, no, like there's natural aspects, like as in being in nature in itself it is a bit of a state when you spend any extended amount of time in nature. It definitely is a bit of like a reframing of the mind. I wanted to ask you about an interesting thing I think you noted in the book about basically what's the opposite of addiction, because and you can correct me if I have this wrong, but I think you noted that it's not necessarily being sober, but it's about being connected to other people. This goes back to what we were talking about, being alone in addiction. So can you tell me about how you arrived at that conclusion?
Yeah, that's a really interesting series of connections you're making there. I mean, the thing about nature and what makes surfing distinct from, say, something like tennis or squash or football or all these other things that you can do and feel good about is surfing is in nature. And the reason it works so well to countervail addiction is because addiction is about the self-eclipsing everything, like my appetite, my need for drugs, my need for alcohol. That becomes huge, and my ego becomes really big and kind of childish. But when I go to the wilderness, you're given a sense of perspective in which you're small again. And it's a good smallness. It's a kind of child of God smallness, right? And everyone feels this instinctively because it connects us to our ancestral time in the forest and in the mountains and in the ocean. And we feel kind of, reintegrated into a proper perspective of our ego selves with the rest of the universe. That's what the wilderness does. Any wilderness sports, like mountain climbing or surfing, has that kind of special advantage over other activities. And the sense of isolation, like if I surf alone, I feel connected, and it's the opposite of the addiction is the opposite of to connective to other people, but also just to the world. It's not as if, I do think that a lot of addicts have experienced some degree of trauma, and they're getting relief from drugs and alcohol, right? They get relief. And a lot of the guys who became really good surfers in my world were getting relief from a certain trauma, because surfing is very immersive and very healing, right? So as they get all that relief, they get more bonded to the act of surfing, and they feel connected to surfing, and they lose that sense of having lost a connection to other people and to the world. And drugs give you that too, but it's a short-lived thing. So the sense of being integrated is that of connection, and that to me is fundamentally the opposite of addiction, rather than sobriety, right?
And you gave a anecdote in the beginning of the book that I thought was interesting, and kind of showed like the human nature in terms of wanting to, like, how surfing could be a thrill with your kids. When you took your daughter out on the board, and like, you guys banged heads, and I was like, oh my god, like, scary. And then she gets up, and I'm thinking she's gonna say, no, daddy, don't want to do this anymore. But no, she gets up and she says, like, yeah, like, let's, when are we doing it again? What did, like, that experience, like, did you have any takeaways from that experience and how it relates to the rest of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I really felt like, there was a t-shirt we got in Hawaii that says that we gave to her called genetically predisposed to surf. And I do think that there are certain kinds of, things that there are surfing families, and I do think that she has that. But like, we don't live in a surf town, and to be honest, I was always a little, sort of conflicted about introducing my kids to surfing because I didn't want them to become as addicted as I was, and
Yeah.
to kind of blow off school and not to, so I want them to be conversant in it without being completely overtaken by it. But she showed in that anecdote, as you're pointing out, she showed that she had that kind of really thrill seeker addictive side to her, and it was just kind of funny to see her kind of shrug off the scary painful aspect of learning to surf, getting her head bumped or being out in slightly too big surf, and just watching her say let's do it again when she came up. I thought she was going to be in tears several times during that session, and I was repeatedly like kind of tickled, and also just like, wow, like this is real.
Yeah, that was an amazing story.
Mhm.
Enrique, did we have any questions from our audience? If not, I'll ask that. I guess maybe a closing question.
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask one more question.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I just found, I just found this whole book interesting in terms of activities, and how, there's different kind of levels of addiction. Different drugs have different levels of addiction. Surfing has a different level of addiction, and then, as a result of that, I think it's fair to say that you can assign some addictions as being a little bit more harmful to the self than other addictions. So, did you have any thoughts, after, completing the book, about how an activity like surfing, which I understand is dangerous, and, as we have discussed, it does, interfere in the lives of others, but, for an addictive personality, I feel like it could be almost a good, like, release at the same time. So, did you have any kind of thoughts coming away from it in terms of, like, are some addictive, like, characteristics, I mean, activities better to pursue than others? And, like, where do you put the scale of, like, morality on those things, or do you? Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I came away feeling like there's no escape from forms of captivity, basically. Like, and this is goes back to the notion of addiction being not the opposite of sobriety. Sobriety sounds like you're drug free and alcohol free, but what else are you? I mean, I can stop doing alcohol and drugs, but what else? What now? What, And what I've concluded is that you're always going to be orienting towards some activity, and that activity is going to have a neurochemical aspect that's going to be addictive, right? So that we're always in captivity, and I'm choosing surfing over another form of captivity, which would be drugs and alcohol, or something that I would be worried would be less powerful. It would hold my attention less powerfully, but might be slightly more, manageable. For instance, like, let's say, like, working out. I like to work out every day. I get a dopamine hit off it. I get serotonin, but working out in its own right, I don't think is enough to keep me off drugs and alcohol. I feel that I have to be careful, or else I could slip. Right. Well, holds my imagination, holds me in thrall enough to keep me off drugs and alcohol. In my sort of calculus, it's surfing. That's the thing that I feel all of this deep connection to, that takes me back to my boyhood and childhood and in a certain sense, pre-culture, that I feel like I can rely on it, even though it has some destructive aspects. I don't think there's any way out of a captivity, is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
And you have to choose. All addictions fall across a spectrum, in other words. And all the way over here is, you know how people are always talking about themselves in terms of, I'm a news junkie,
Yeah.
or I'm a this junkie or a that junkie. That's expressing a truth. And the truth is that when you turn on the news at night, when I turn on the news and there's some news that I'm looking forward to hearing, I'm getting a little dopamine hit, right?
Mhm.
I'm kind of going to get my infotainment, right? I'm going to get my infotainment on. It's not that different from a cocktail. And I'm kind of going, okay, here we go. Now, that's neurochemically real. It's not just like I'm
Yeah.
fond of it. It's happening in my brain. And so I feel like there's a kind of choice you can make about, a kind of calculation you can make about the wise captivity, right? And I feel like I've made mine, and and this book makes an argument for surfing in terms of being a good captivity, but I would always say we're always in one form or another of captivity. There's no freedom in that way.
Mm,
You see
I
what I'm
like
saying?
it. I like that point about there's captivities that have more of a good tendency than others, but there's no escape from captivity in general. I mean, this is life where we have chemicals running through our brains, and we're stuck with them one way or another. You got to find the best way.
And we have bodies. We're like locked into these bodies. We're like spirits in a material world. Like we're locked in, like our spirits inhabit this machine, in effect, like it's a very sophisticated machine, but we don't have you have limits, and you've got to feed it, and you've got to give it water, and all sorts of things. That's
Yeah,
captivity. We're captive from the very beginning. So what do you do with that? Right?
right. You got to take care of our vessels, right? Our what
Take care of the vessel and find a good thing to kind of give the vessel to feel fully engaged by, that's not going to derail you completely.
yeah. Well, Thad, I really appreciated talking with you. And, I don't know whether or not we have questions, Enrique, but like I liked how your book really took a big picture, swing at a connection between nature and human behavior. I mean, I thought that was, a pretty brave and deep subject for you to tackle. So I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed talking with you.
Well, I enjoyed talking with you too, David. Great questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both so much. Every single time we do one of these, I want to read every single one of the books that we're interviewing as a part of this series. I had never thought about that either. Like you said, you could get sober, you could not be doing drugs or alcohol, but then what? We're
Yep.
human. We're always going to be stuck in some form of captivity. So I love that. I had never thought about like the sense of choosing a wise captivity. I think that's a really incredible thought, and I cannot wait to read your book as well. This has been an absolute pleasure. A couple last things before we wrap up. I will say thank you so much. Like I said, thank you everyone for joining us, and to our audience for listening and participating. You can visit us online, visit the WPHL online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at FIUWPHL. So make sure to follow us for updates on future talks and future events. And also make sure that you come out to the Miami Book Fair. Okay, so this is going to be the 38th Miami Book Fair, happening from November 14th to the 21st of this year. So coming up soon in a few weeks at the Miami-Dade College Wolfson campus in downtown Miami. I'm going to put some information in the chat to RSVP, where you can access the virtual conversations that are happening as a part of the Miami Book Fair in November as well. So make sure that you join that as well. If you're here, you can RSVP at miamibookfair.com, and you can also access the virtual conversations at miamibookfaironline.com. And like we mentioned before, Thad is just one of the many other authors from around the world participating in the Miami Book Fair 2021, the nation's largest gathering of writers and readers of all ages. They are really looking forward to sharing their work, their new ideas with everyone in person and online. So please visit, like I said, the Miami Book Fair for more information. Follow the Miami Book Fair at Miami Book Fair online on Instagram and social media. And if you post, if you end up joining, hashtag Miami Book Fair 2021. Okay, but once again, Thad and David, this has been an absolute pleasure. So much respect for you both. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Enrique. Thad, my pleasure.